Today we're going to talk about what BIM is and what Revit is just like a little introduction. And I've got a file that we're going to play around with and kind of look at just to sort of like get our feet wet about this software before we start our first major project within it. So in the past, we have been working with CAD, and primarily we've been working with AutoCAD. CAD stands for computer aided drafting. Some people claim computer aided design, and we can sit and bicker and fight over it. But really, where I think CAD stands for computer aided drafting is because that is what you're doing. You're not really designing anything, you are creating a drafted set of construction documents or even just documents for manufacturing. So, the tricky part of working in AutoCAD and other CAD software is everything's two-dimensional. So, you as the designer or drafter are responsible for knowing how that set of construction documents needs to go together to be technically correct. The problem that can happen is if you do not know the standards that need to be set, your drawings may be incorrect, your drawings might not correlate well with each other. The other problem is if a change needs to happen. So let's say in the case of these interior elevations for this kitchen area, if the client decides that they want the kitchen completely redone, or even say just expanding this wall out 10 feet, it's up to you as the designer and drafter to go and update the interior elevations, as well as the floor plans, the structural plans, the exterior elevations, anything that may have to get changed with something just as small as expanding a wall out needs to manually get updated. AutoCAD has no idea that this is an interior elevation of kitchen cabinets. All AutoCAD knows is that there are lines and circles and text boxes placed in different areas, but it doesn't know what it's making. And so there really is kind of a downside to AutoCAD in that it's going to take an incredibly knowledgeable user to know how the pieces and parts are going to be coming together in there. Now, where BIM comes into play is BIM stands for Building Information Modeling, and that means that BIM software knows that you are creating a building, and it knows that this is an architecture project. What is really useful about that is then these standards of how projects and construction documents for said projects come together are pretty much built into the software. So it expedites the process a lot for making those construction documents. And since everything is linked or connected together, a change made in one place gets made in other places. So within that building information modeling, each piece of your drawing or of your model is its own separate kind of parameter or separate element in the drawing. And therefore, there is a lot of information built into those elements. So when you place a wall, software like Revit is aware that it's a wall and it's aware of what a wall needs to do within a building. And so it can then really expedite the process a lot, as well as the relationships between our foundations, our floors, our walls, our roofs, our windows, and our doors. All of those elements kind of work together, and we can really make our building a little bit easier. Because also it is a 3D modeling software as opposed to AutoCAD as a 2D modeling software, we do have the ability to do a little bit more design work in it than we would in AutoCAD, because we can test out ideas and sort of think about them and see the results in real time as we play them out, rather than within AutoCAD. If we wanted to expand a kitchen out, it would take a little bit longer to kind of see how that would look or play. So BIM is not only just a three-dimensional software in which we're making a 3D model of the building, it's also has a couple of more dimensions to it, and many people will argue that it is a 10-dimension software, but really in this course we're not going to explore it past like the 6th dimension a little bit. But not only are we creating just 3D geometry of our form and our shape within our building, We can also then, within all of those parametric elements, we can put in a schedule for when parts are going into the building or when demolition might be happening, when pieces are arriving for it. So we can schedule things out as a project manager within BIM. We can also, within each of those elements, if we know what our wall is made out of, we can then figure out how much drywall we need to purchase because we know exactly how our wall is getting framed out within our model. And then we can figure out, okay, well, this is how much, square footage of drywall I have, or I can even figure out how much glass I need, how many windows I need to buy, and then we can get a pretty accurate cost estimation of what our building's going to be. And then additionally, we can do some life cycle analysis from a sustainability perspective. So we can actually figure out where our building is in any geographic location and how much it is going to cost to heat and cool that building and get a pretty accurate estimate depending on how well we've modeled our building out and how much information we've tagged into our building. And so what's shown here is just an example of looking at how much light is coming into this building as well as then how much heat may be coming into this building. With all of this glass work there, you're going to get different hot spots and different points for it. Some of the other dimensions that can be explored within the software are things like safety. You can build safety in there as well as other project management features. Lean construction is becoming ever more popular, especially in urban areas where you have a really tight lot that you may have to work on. And so you can schedule and manage a project where pieces are getting delivered as they're being assembled into the building to really kind of make the process as fast as possible within it. And even then, we can look at kind of more industrialized construction within the software. But really, what we're going to explore is highly looking at the geometry of just making our 3D model in our construction documents, and then a little bit too on the sustainability side of things in projects as well. So the software we're going to focus on in this class is Revit. Revit was originally kind of its own software, but then the company Autodesk acquired or purchased it in 2002. And then it really started gaining popularity in 2008, which I personally am always like 2008 was not that long ago, and I still hold true to that. So it's still a sort of newer software out there, and each year they do produce a new version. And now it's a little different than how AutoCAD, each year they release a new version of AutoCAD, and that software really has not changed or updated in at least, 14, 15 years or so. The Revit versions, when they release their updates, there are major features and fixes that are being added to it. So they're kind of updating and making the software a little bit better each time around. But also then as a user, sometimes it can be a little bit more difficult because then you have to relearn or revise the way that you might have been doing things. The benefit for Revit as opposed to CAD is that everything is just one whole three-dimensional model. So you are just modeling your building and it's creating all of those 2D construction document views for you because it understands those standards. So as you model your floor plan, your elevations are being created by default. As you add in foundation features, they're all getting just built into this one comprehensive model with various linked views to it. That then can create the set of construction documents. The other benefit to Revit is its rendering capabilities, which really they've sort of sourced out now in 2024. But it does have some in-house rendering capabilities where you can really sort of start to better imagine what your building is going to be as its final result. And that can be great to help either bid out for projects or just to help show clients what they might be looking at or considering in an end result. And finally, too, another great thing within Revit that unfortunately we're not going to have time to explore is some of its collaboration capabilities. So within Revit are features called work sets, and essentially within those work sets, you can have several users in a file simultaneously working on it, and that can really help expedite a process, especially for very large firms working on very large buildings. They can have someone working on all of the electrical and lighting plans while someone else also finishes out the foundation, and maybe someone else is working on then the facade of one particular side. So you can sort of check out or lock up some of the elements that you are working on while someone else works on a different part of the building, and you can really expedite stuff within these work set features. But we don't have time to look at those, as well as we don't have networked computers to be able to look at some of those things. Now, a couple of things about Revit that are just important to know or note on is that Revit currently is a Windows-only software. You can only run it on a Windows computer. There are some BIM softwares out there that do have a Mac option. One that I'll know right off the top of my head would be ArchiCAD. But I'll be honest, I have downloaded the student version of ArchiCAD, and I believe I've opened it once or twice. I haven't really played around with it. I'm really just more of a person who prefers Revit. So it does require a Windows computer to work. I would also highly recommend, if you are going to install the student version on a laptop of yours, that it should have an Intel i7 or whatever the AMD equivalent would be for it. Otherwise, Revit will run pretty slowly. And I would also say to have 16 gigabytes of RAM on your computer as well. Otherwise, again, it might be pretty laggy and pretty slow. It will run on a lower processor, and it will run with 8 gigabytes of RAM as the minimum, but it will just be kind of slow and laggy. So if you are interested in downloading a copy for yourself, it is the same way you would download your AutoCAD software. You would go to the Autodesk educational website, and you can then sign in and choose to download Revit. We are going to be using the 2025 version, but hopefully I'll be using this video in the future. So just kind of keep in mind what I email out for which version you should be downloading. And you'll just have to go through your process of either signing in or creating an account. Let me go back to my presentation. Additionally, we do have Revit on all of the computers within Catherine Harper Hall. So if you wanted to access the computer labs, this is our current schedule for the fall 2024. Room 207, which is the room we meet in, is pretty booked up. However, there are some opportunities for tutoring hours, as well as it is open on Wednesday and Thursday evenings. And then additionally, the building is accessible on weekends as long as you have your app card to swipe in. Room 40 is another computer lab that we have. Room 40 has a little bit more availability during the day for you to come in and be able to work, and then also Fridays and weekends as well. So you can either choose to download your own version of Revit, or you can access the computer labs to work on Revit. And another resource that is available, though it isn't the greatest, but it is better than nothing, is Udesk. And so I have a link here for Udesk. The website is just udesk.appstate.edu. And within this, you can log on to a virtual desktop. So within Udesk, you'll just log into your account. Let me just type in my email address. Then I'm going to pause while I type my password. And so after you sign in the first time, it will make you sign in again. This is the one that you're going to want to access, the Applied Design and STBE GPU. You should have access to this. I put in a ticket request to give you access. And we'll click Allow for our resources. Let me pause one more time. And then what this is going to do is log you on to one of the desktops in Catherine Harper Hall virtually. And so you'll be able to access all of the various software, including AutoCAD, Revit, Inventor, Fusion, kind of all of our different software here. Now, again, couple of things to keep in mind within Udesk is one of the things is that you should not be saving to your virtual computer here because it's not going to actually save. What they recommend you do is either download the files to your computer or upload them to your Google Drive to back them up. And the other important thing too with Udesk is that it is only going to be as useful and effective as your internet connection is stable and sturdy. So one thing to keep in mind is that if your internet is really slow, then Udesk is also going to be really slow. And make sure too that while you have Udesk open, you are actively using the software, because if you just kind of hang out or go to another tab and just leave this hanging out here, it will log you off of it. Additionally, I have linked here, and I'll email these out to you as well, of just kind of accessing. So these are just instructions for how to log on to the Udesk software and access it, as well as then a little bit further down, there are links and help for having your files saved to either your device or putting them in Google Drive for you so you can be able to save your work when you're working through Udesk. And so now I'm just going to sign out. We can really leave because I didn't do much in Udesk anyway. So we've got a couple of different options for you to be able to access Revit work in there. Now, I want to just sort of look at some of the things or features of Revit before we actually open up the software and look at our sample file. So when you first start Revit up, it's going to start you in kind of a pretty generic start screen. I took these screenshots in the 23 version, but it hasn't changed much, where you'll see all of the recent projects you've worked on. And then we've got a difference between models and families. So models are the buildings or the projects themselves, and then families are all of the different things that are going into your project. So you'll see here that I have a couple of different houses that I was working on in this version, and these were all just like the houses themselves. And then the families were things like a light switch, a single flushed door, a washer dryer that was stacked, even an annotation tag that went in there. This was a column that I downloaded off the internet, sort of like a CAD block. This was just like a paper, just a generic title block paper in there. So it'll have your different models that you'll work on, as well as different families then that you can create or load into projects. Now, when you're in a project, we have our quick access toolbar at the top, which is pretty similar to working in AutoCAD as well, where we have the ability to save our work, print our work, export it to a PDF, add dimensions, look at it 3D, and then also kind of switch some of our lines and line weights. So we'll use, in this area, the buttons I use the most are my little 3D one, as well as my thin lines or my line weight option. And then in your toolbar, you have kind of different palettes or different panels within your various toolbars. Your basic modeling tools are all within your building palette, so we can create walls, doors, windows, components, or sort of anything else, floors, roofs, the different parts or pieces that go into a building. Because remember, Revit is savvy enough to know that we are creating a building itself. You'll see that there are a bunch of other tabs up here. We'll go explore some of them in this course, but there's really so much to do and we have so little time of it. And additionally, two of the most important features within Revit here is your properties bar or your properties panel and your project browser here. So your properties panel is going to show you information and all of the different pieces and bits, because remember, within that information modeling, there's a huge amount of info tagged within each element. So whatever I have selected, my properties panel is going to tell me about that particular thing. Right now, since I don't have anything selected, it's kind of just giving me the information about just looking at this view, how much detail it'll have, If I wanted to crop it or section it off, I could. And then if I clicked on a window, it would show me the information about there. Your project browser, which by default sits right underneath it, is going to then be able to, or kind of give you the ability to move around from different views. So you see here that right now we're currently in just our 3D view, but I could switch to my level 1 floor plan or my level 2 floor plan, my east elevation, my north elevation. So these are kind of how I can navigate to my various construction documents or my 2D views, as well as then I can also set up my sheets, which are sort of the Revit equivalent of what Paperspace may be. And additionally, at the bottom is our status bar or toolbar, which has a lot of visibility features about how we may look at particular views and how we might interact or change how stuff is appearing or looking. And then in a 3-dimensional view, we also have a view cube up here, which is one of the ways we can orbit around. We can also use just holding our scroll wheel like a button to pan around, and then we can use shift in the scroll wheel to move around. And we'll open up the sample file in a few minutes to kind of play around and look at that in there. So on this next slide, I've switched over to my level 1 floor plan. I was able to get into this level 1 floor plan by just double clicking on it here in my project browser. I double clicked on that view and then I was able to get into this plan. And then anytime I'm in a view, I can move a bunch of the features around about how things might look. So right now I have my scale of my view set to an 1/8 of an inch equals a foot, and I've got my detail level set to coarse. So I can set my detail level to fine, and that would start showing me all of the different layers that might sit in my wall. And I can also change the scale, which would then affect how annotations and different parts or pieces might come up with it. Most of the time when you select something, so in this current state, you'll see here that this window's blue. I've selected that window, I've clicked on it, and my properties panel has updated to tell me information about this window. So it's telling me what size this window is, it's telling me what level this window's on, its sill height, and then I could even go and change how some of the parts or features are going to be going in there. You can see here too, it's even got a scroll bar. There's so much more information that it could be telling me, and I could go find. And a lot of times too in Revit, when we select something, our modified toolbar up at the top will appear, and this then can help me maybe change or align or adjust different features within this window of where this window is kind of sitting and working in there. Now, another thing within Revit and your properties toolbar is we have, and I believe I have it on the next slide, is our edit type or our type properties. And this is where we can really start to put some of that nitty-gritty information in. Some of the ways you can navigate Revit is you can definitely use the buttons or the tools within your toolbars and within your palettes up here, or you can use keyboard shortcuts. Every keyboard shortcut in Revit is 2 letters, and what can be a little hard with the shift from AutoCAD is we got really used to typing enter at the end of everything, and we no longer have to do that within Revit. So within Revit, each keyboard shortcut is 2 keys. So for example, the wall keyboard shortcut is WA, and then it would start the wall tool by default. You can also make your own custom keyboard shortcuts, and that's something we'll explore a little bit in these projects. Is there's a lot of tools that I use often that I've kind of made my own custom ones for. Anytime you click on any element or any piece, you get information about that and all of its different properties or different pieces of information that we can add to said wall or window or whatever it might be that we've clicked on. There are a bunch of different ways to change around your view. So the property or project browser is the most popular one or common one, but I'll even show you a couple of different ways we can move and alter around of what we're looking at. And then just like AutoCAD, we'll hold down our scroll wheel like a button. If you click on that scroll wheel, you'll be able to pan yourself around or move. And if you hold the shift key while also clicking on the scroll wheel, you can orbit around three-dimensionally if you're in a 3D view. So I mentioned a little bit before about this edit type feature or this edit type button. So this is just, again, looking at the properties of that same window we just looked at, and all of its different kind of pieces here. But then we'll see when I clicked on edit type, my type properties come up, and I can really then customize this window. I could customize its materials, its dimensions, and if I was to scroll down further, I could even then put information related to all of its different R values and its weight and its costs. And that way I could really manage a project pretty well. So I could do a structural analysis if I want to figure out how much, this building was going to be pressing down onto the foundation. I can find a lot of that information as long as I've added it in or put it in here. And some things do come with that stuff by default, but you can really start to specify pieces within here. And then another thing within Revit that is really cool are its rendering capabilities. So it does have this in-house Revit ability, so in which it can make a realistic view that you then can export into Photoshop or even then take into like AI software to really further render or look at. I have noticed, and so I originally made this presentation in 23. I've only updated or tweaked it a little bit. In 24, Revit started putting what is called twin motion into their software sort of by default. So I used to use an extension called Enscape. They no longer offer a free educational version of Enscape anymore, for students at least. So we have switched over to twin motion. Enscape was made by Chaos Games, and people still use it. And then twin motion is made by Epic Games. So a lot of gaming companies sort of got into that architecture side of rendering because same things apply of, good graphics. And that's why too, when students ask me what kind of computer should they buy, I usually recommend like gaming laptops and gaming PCs because they're made with a lot of RAM and a good graphics card. And that's sort of what you're looking at or needing to when you're doing CAD work or BIM work in there. But we'll play around with some of the rendering capabilities too, because those are usually the fun part students like to play around with. And then another thing as well is we do have the ability to set up paper spaces and also set up just exports to software like AutoCAD and Illustrator. So I do teach a special topics course all about architectural model making, and particularly using laser cutters to do that sort of model making stuff. And so we can take a lot of our detail work from Revit and we can export it to manipulate it further or to cut out using various CNC equipment. So if you're interested in that, we usually do offer that class within the spring or try to offer it each spring in there. Again, this is probably something we're not going to do within this particular course, but I really want to make sure that you guys know that these options are there and available, and kind of just introduce you to the ideas or the topics. And so with that, I'm going to go into our As You Learn page again. Now, your As You Learn page may look slightly different because I am recording this in fall 2024, but in your BIM category, there is this file here called Revit demo file, and we're just going to download that, and then you can open it up and play with it. We're not doing anything in this file other than just looking at it and playing around with it, so feel free to like delete pieces out of it and, play or really truly mess around with it. It's not going to hurt anything at all in there. So you can download it and then open it on up. I just want to look quickly too at Revit before I open it up and kind of my Revit start page. One thing that probably looks very different from my Revit start page than yours is that I'm currently in dark mode. I will show you how to get access to that if you want to. You don't have to work in dark mode, but it'll just have all of the different files I've worked on recently, and then too some sample files as well. We're not going to open any of these sample files just because they are honestly too much for a beginner. They're trying, really what they're doing in this architectural one is cramming every feature imaginable, and it's just really overwhelming for you as a beginner. So we're not going to open or look at it at all. If you want your Revit in dark mode, what you can do is click on your home panel up here, and then go into File, and then Options. And then within your options, if you go into Colors. If you go into your colors here, you can change your user interface theme. So if I put mine into light, this is what it looks like. I just find this personally a little overbearing. I prefer dark mode when I'm working. And so that's why I like to have dark mode on, but absolutely do what you want. So again, let's click on this home and then File, Options, Colors, and then you can change your theme here. So I just prefer the dark theme. Now, let me go back to my home page here, and I'll just open it from my Google Chrome. Just open up Demo House. May take a little while to load on your computer, depending on how fast your computer may be. And so by default in this demo house, it has put us into my level 1 floor plan. So again, a couple of ways I can navigate around is I could open up my various tabs up here, which I currently really only just have my level 1 floor plan. I can move around through my views here, so we can look at level 2 if I just double click on level 2. And you'll notice then that there's also now a level 1 and level 2 here. And additionally, we can move ourselves around three-dimensionally if we come up here and click on this little default 3D view tool. So I didn't really decorate a lot of this house, I'll be honest. I'm not an interior designer, and this was more just a quick refresher from Revit that I did with Studio One students. So it's kind of a pretty basic, simple house. And just looking at some of our features visually within it, we can zoom in and out just by scrolling, and it will scroll in based on where your wheel is. So you'll notice if I'm over this chimney, that's where it scrolls. If I go to this kitchen table, that's where it scrolls. We can also change the canvas in the background with the keyboard shortcut CA. So then I can just go back into a light mode or a dark mode. So I usually find that I prefer my canvas in light mode with all my toolbars in dark mode. And I'm not sure why, that's just how I like to work. You work however you want to. If we want to orbit around three-dimensionally, well, we can move around just by clicking our scroll wheel like a button and then panning. So I can click and hold to move around. If I hold the Shift key while holding the scroll wheel, I can then orbit around my building three-dimensionally. Or you can use your view cube up here to also just move to views really quickly. So if you wanted to go to one particular view just to kind of see or look at it from that perspective, you can. So again, we can either navigate through our tabs up here. Once we've got some views open, we can navigate through our views in our floor plan. Additionally, let's say I go into my east elevation, my east view. These spot elevations that exist here, if I double click on those, it'll take me to that view. Same thing with these elevation markers or tags here. If I double clicked, it'll take me to that view as well. So there's a couple of different ways to navigate around. I usually will just use my project browser because I just find that the easiest way to move around. Now I'll go into my level 1 floor plan, and I just kind of want to see or explain or look at some of the features that exist that are just like really cool and wonderful. Is that everything in this building or in this model is one comprehensive model. So what makes that so cool is that if I decide this glass wall here, if I was to click on this glass wall, it tells me that it's a curtain wall or a glass wall. It also then is giving me all of these pieces of information about how tall it is and how it's getting installed. But let's say I just don't want it anymore. So if I hit delete on my keyboard after clicking on it, I can remove that wall out of here. But what's wonderful is it not only just moved it in this floor plan, if I go back into my 3D view by clicking on this button, it's gone here. It's just removed from the model entirely. And if I was to look at my south elevation, it's not in my south elevation. If I decide I don't want this chimney, I can select it. I could click on each wall individually, or I could use my selection sets where we can click and drag, just like AutoCAD. We've got solid ones and we've got dashed ones. So if I clicked and dragged, I could do a selection set over that entire chimney, hit delete. It's gone from my south elevation. It's gone in my level 1 floor plan. If I go into my level 2 floor plan, he's no longer there. And even in my 3D view, it's completely gone. So everything is this entirely linked model. So if I make a change in one view, it updates in all of them. I'm going to just use Control Z to undo a bunch of that so I can bring some of that stuff back. And let's go play around with some more parts of it. So too, if I go into my level 2 floor plan and I decide that I don't want this window sitting at 3 feet over anymore, I can select this window and I can change that number to say, let's do 2'6". And now it's 2'6" over. So not only did it update my dimension, but it also just shifted the window along with it. So each piece is a really connected parameter. Another thing too to think about in Revit is thinking feet and inches. So if I was just to type 4, Revit is going to assume 4 foot. So you'll notice when I went to move this number, if I want it back at 3 feet, I could just do 3 space 0, enter. And now it's at 3 feet over. So we don't have to worry as much about those dimensions. You definitely can type in your dimension markers, but you don't need to think about them as much anymore, which is pretty nice. And again, any change you make in one view is going to get automatically updated into all of your other views, which can be just such a time saver of working with and playing around. I'm going to go back into my 3-dimensional view here. So again, my shortcut to do that is just through here. And as I kind of orbit around, some other things that we'll just look at and play with. Again, this is really just to get you a little bit comfortable with the software, is some of our visual styles down here. So with our visual styles, I'm right now in consistent colors. I can click on this cube and I can put myself into just like hidden line, which only puts me in black and white mode. I could switch over to realistic. I never recommend you do that. It's going to really lag your computer out. So I'm going to keep myself here in hidden line. We can also play with our shadows of having our shadows on or off. So I can turn my shadows on or off. Sometimes shadows might lag a computer out, so it's always nice to maybe have them turned off. And then we can kind of look at our building a little bit more conceptually. Especially when projects are in like earlier stages, I always recommend having stuff in just hidden line, because then you don't have these like color attachments, and sometimes people will get really like focused on a specific finish where like that's not the focus. The focus is really like, do we like this form of this big chimney here, or would we rather have something else going on in here? So each piece or each feature, again, has a bunch of different parameters along with it. So if I click on this chimney here, we can see, or this wall here, that this is a basic type wall that I've just called chimney. I maybe have given it some properties. I'm having it start at level 1, and my top constraint, I just said go up 30 feet. If I wanted to, I can change that to say actually go up 40 feet, and then once I move my cursor out of the properties bar, this wall is just taller now, so I can really play around with things, and I can attach parts or pieces to each other through a couple of different means. And if I'd said, well, I actually just want it to only go up to, a certain level, I can say, actually, for this top constraint, just go up to level 3. And then it'll be at level 3, which is my height for these walls here. So that's why it's currently gone. And we can even decide or move where level 3 sits. So if I hit escape a trillion times, so that's pretty familiar from working in AutoCAD, we could click on level 3 and I could say, put level 3 40 feet in the air. And not only did it move all of those walls up, it moved the windows up with it because all of those things were attached to where level 3 sits. It's right now warning me saying, hey, this wall no longer kind of works the way you wanted it to work because of that. So I'm just going to hit cancel because I don't want to do that. And I'll control Z to put my wall back to where it was. But you really have kind of this freedom to play around and mess around with pieces and parts for it. And so what I would encourage you to do is within this file here, feel free to explore some of the different parts or features within it, to look around in it, to mess with pieces, parts, move some things, add in some of your own walls and doors and windows, just to kind of get a little bit of a feel for the software. This is one of the softwares there that you really have to sort of play and mess around with it to get a good feel of how parts or pieces are moving. Absolutely email me with any questions, and then when we return, we will be starting with our first Revit project as a follow along from the Appalachian Energy Center.